From the beautiful Finger Lakes region of upstate New York, this is the Dental Lighthouse Podcast. We take questions from anyone in the dental profession and discuss what it takes to win not only in dentistry, but in life. Business, leadership, relationships, parenting, health and wellness, money management, nothing is off limits on the Dental Lighthouse Podcast. I'm Jason Tenori, your host, and have over 20 years of experience to pull from. Learn from my mistakes and let me help you collapse time so you can become the best version of yourself. Yo, Dr. Jason here, and hopefully last week you listened to the part one of my lecture that I did for the Dental Success Institute on optimal doctor scheduling. It's a shared podcast with Dr. Mark Costas, the Dentalpreneur podcast. Again, an amazing resource if you're not already listening to that podcast. But this is the part two, second half of the presentation. I hope you find value in it. We will share the PowerPoint in the show notes. And if you have any questions or concerns, you want some clarity on what I'm talking about here, please don't hesitate to reach out. Talk to you soon. So how does the front desk know where to put things? So there's basically three ways. They can guess, okay? They can go ask the doctor, or they can follow one of the documented systems that we're going to talk about next. And that's the router, the chart notes, and the established template. So we obviously don't want the front desk guessing, okay? I would guess that some of you probably fall into this number two. Go ask the doctor. And there's nothing that causes more stress throughout the day when you're in the middle of molar endo and the front desk comes to you and says, "Doc, where do you want me to put this?" Right? And if you're anything like me, you answer sarcastically, a little passive aggressively, and then you're like, "I can't believe we hired her. She's such a shit show." But the reality is it's a failure of leadership because you weren't clearly articulate with where you want things. Okay. So what I want to spend a few minutes talking about is the three ways that I think you should consider. And I know a lot of you guys, this is the cream of the crop. So I know a lot of you guys are already doing this. But just bear with me. So the router, we love routers. We leverage routers. It's a piece of paper. We use the back of the router to follow the patient all the way through the appointment. Okay. This is the bottom half of our router. Okay. I can share our full router if you would like, but this is the bottom half of our router. And we were talking about this in our hot seat. Most important things right here is this, and this. And as you guys know, this stands for NDTR. So what is the next appointment for this patient? When is that next appointment due? How much time do I need for that next appointment? And then always a final catch on recall. Okay. So I'm going to go through an example here next, right? So this is a real router that one of my docs filled out. They diagnosed that an MDFL on tooth number 26 needs to be done. This is an important one right here that a lot of you guys sometimes look over. Within a month or so. Okay. And the reason that we put this box here is because if we're trying to create a sense of urgency to the patient, then that sense of urgency needs to be communicated on multiple fronts. Okay. And we develop this due date based on morning meeting. So, this particular doctor, Dr. Kate, is booked out for like the next 3 weeks. So if Kate or the hygienist is going to tell this patient, you need to get in ASAP to get this filling done. And Mrs. Jones like, hell yeah, I do. Mrs. Jones goes to the front desk and says, the next available appointment for Dr. Kate is in 4 weeks. What do you think Mrs. Jones is going to say? She's going to be pissed. But Dr. Kate and the hygienist just told me that I need to get in ASAP for this. And you're telling me that you don't have any availability for the next month? So that's why at morning meeting, at least in our offices, one of the things that we talk about is, when is the next doctor availability appointment to get stuff like this in? Okay. So if you guys can all get on the same page with that with your teams, I think it will help you get your patients motivated to get scheduled. The time. So Dr. Kate wants 60 minutes in the second chair for this. And then this is a periodontal maintenance appointment. You can see right here, the hygienist wants 3 months. So the front desk person will get that scheduled. Here's another example. Andrea diagnosed buildup in crowns on 4 and 5, ASAP, right? The reason that they put ASAP in there is because at morning meeting, it was probably discovered that Andrea has a 2-hour appointment tomorrow, right? So now we can communicate this sense of urgency to Mrs. Jones. The doctor can do it, the hygienist can do it, the front desk can do it, and the hope is that Mrs. Jones ultimately takes this ASAP appointment, which is tomorrow. Andrea needs 2 hours in the first chair, and then looks like the recall appointment for this particular patient is a new patient in hygiene. So the router is the most accurate way for us to determine where the appointment gets scheduled, what chair, how much further it needs to be put out. The backup to the router is the open dental chart notes, right? So that first router that I showed you, 26 MDEFL, the assistant or the hygienist is also putting it right under this column here, restorative, right? And the reason we do this is if Mrs. Jones leaves without scheduling, and then they call a week later and says, I want to schedule that filling appointment that Dr. Kate told me I needed, the person's going to go right to their open dental chart and see right here that it needs to be done. Now, I know some of you guys put this in the treatment plan. Again, there's no wrong or right way to do this. This is how we do it. It's the most predictable way to do it. So if they don't schedule while in the office, then whoever's answering the phone can go to open dental chart, can see this right here, and they know that this filling needs to be in Dr. Kate's second chair for 60 minutes. And then I just blew it up here so you can see it a little bit better. So what if we don't have access to the router? What if the open dental chart is wrong or someone didn't fill this out? The third and final way is we have standard templates. So every doctor fills this out every quarter, right? And this is a Google sheet that every scheduling coordinator, every treatment coordinator has access to. So they just give generalized guidelines on how long it takes them to build up and crown, how long it takes them to do endo, 1 to 2 fillings, 3 fillings. And you can see that there's differences here, right? And I want these doctors to have the autonomy to do things different. Ryan needs 2 hours for a build-up and crown. Chris needs an hour and a half. All right, awesome. So you go to these scheduling templates that are on Google, and you follow these. And if you're going to schedule this build-up and crown with Ryan, then you better find a 2-hour and first chair appointment. If you're going to schedule with Chris, then it's 90 minutes. So let's spend a little bit of time talking about scheduling blocks. I want to be respectful of time here. Is this clock accurate? It is accurate. This? What does this mean? This is the ambiguity that I'm talking about. Like if you have this in your office, like how much time should I schedule for that crown? All right, let's go through this. All right, so let's just kind of go over some next level stuff. Getting predictability, right? We've all had those days where you are doing fillings all day long, right? It's stressful, it's hard. You get to the end of the day and you're burnt out, and then you look at, like I said, you look at your production report and you're like, oh my gosh, it really wasn't even that productive and I'm burnt out. So how do you get around that? You use scheduling blocks, and we'll talk about here in the next slide. You need to have clarity on what your limitations are. And it's going to be based on how busy you are. It's going to be based on your skill set. It's going to be based on all those things. But I would ask you to start to consider how many restorative or filling appointments are you comfortable with on a regular basis. Maybe it's 1 in the morning and 1 in the afternoon. Maybe it's 2 in the morning and 1 in the afternoon. Maybe it's you've developed a skill set and a following, Max, where you shouldn't be doing any more restorative. Okay? So you don't do any more restorative. And you're giving it to your associate or something like that. And we'll talk a little bit about the verbiage for that. But have clarity on what your guidelines are. All right. Once you have clarity on what your guidelines are, don't cave. Don't start making up all of these like side rules. You know, well, Mrs. Jones really wants you to do this filling. Well, I guess I could do it for Mrs. Jones. Like, stop doing that, because your front desk is cursing you because you've set up guidelines and then you change them the next day. Okay. So there's a couple ways to do this. So with Open Dental, we'll put limitations on the top, right? So Dr. Kate only wants 2 restorative or 2 direct resin fillings in her appointments in her chair. So we'll put a number 2 here, okay? And then as somebody puts it in the schedule, they'll change it to 1 and they'll change it to 0. So this is just a blow up here. So that's one way to do it. This works. Another way to do it is to actually block it, right? So if you're trying to put, say, this is a crown block, but you could put restorative here. I'm going to put a restorative block here, and I'm going to put a restorative block down here. You give the treatment coordinator the autonomy to move that appointment up and down. But once that block gets filled, then there's no more restorative that day. Direct resin restorative that day. Then you're going to the next day, or then you're going to the next day, and then you're going to the next day. So this is a great way for some of you senior docs or founder docs to still do basic restorative fillings for patients, because you're not at the point where you want to just say, I'm done with that, but you'll be booked out a ways, right? So Mrs. Jones, Dr. Max can do these fillings for you. His next available opening to do this is in May. Okay. And if Mrs. Jones wants to wait till May, then you put that appointment in. If Mrs. Jones doesn't want to wait till May, well, wouldn't you know, we have Dr. So-and-so here who's really, really good at this. She's got availability tomorrow. She can see you for that. All right. And then just let the patient choose. So what if one doc diagnoses, but another doc's going to do the treatment? This happens at a lot of you 1 to 2, 2 to 3 doc offices. I just want to walk you through what works for us. So first off, you got to make sure that everyone knows what the office mindset is. And I'm picking on Max here, but it's easy because he's awesome. So if Max goes into a hygiene room and diagnoses 3MO, 4DO needs to be done, but he's decided that he's no longer doing restorative, then what he needs to do is this 3-step process. Admit that he sucks. Mrs. Jones, I haven't done restorative in like a year, and you don't want me doing this. I'm not very good at this procedure anymore, right? That may sound stupid, but it's easy to say, right? Then you need to edify the next doctor. We have a doctor here that's been with us for a year, and she specializes in this type of procedure. She's taken a lot of CE on this procedure. If I needed this procedure done, this is who I would go to, right? So admit you suck, edify the other doctor, and then most importantly, don't cave, right? Because what happens is you leave the hygiene room, you feel good about yourself, and then the treatment coordinator comes running down the hall and says, but doc, Mrs. Jones will only see you. Can you do this one time? And then the answer to that question says a lot, right? The answer is no. You cannot do it this one time, all right? And you have to stick with that. So I want to just finally touch upon some other things that, in my opinion, will lead to some predictability. Appointment deposits. Again, there's no right or wrong here. I'll share with you guys what we do, and then you can decide whatever you want to do. We take deposits on all first chair appointments. Okay? So usually it's 10% of the patient's out of pocket we'll take as a deposit. That's a fully refundable deposit if the patient moves the appointment within 48 hours. If they don't, they lose the deposit. Okay? Patients don't like to lose deposits. If you don't want to use 10% of the out-of-pocket, you can do $100 an hour. So if it's an hour and a half appointment, it could be a $150 deposit, whatever you want to do. But I truly believe that patients need to have some skin in the game to assure that they're going to show up, or to assure that they're going to give you enough notice to cancel the appointment. Confirmation protocols. Again, you do you. We insist on confirmations. And if a patient does not confirm, we'll send a text message saying that we are removing you from the schedule because you have not confirmed this appointment. I can assure you that 90% of the unconfirmed appointments that we have in our office, patient doesn't show up. Why are you doing this to yourself? Why are you shooting yourself in the foot? Again, you might have a much more affluent patient base than I do. And if you don't need to go through a protocol like this, then you do you. But in our particular situation, if the patient doesn't confirm, we're taking the appointment out. We have a fool me once rule. All right, we use this for recall. So we don't insist on deposits for recall appointments. But if a patient no call or no shows on us once in a 24-month period, then we're insisting that they put down a deposit to reschedule their hygiene appointment. A lot of patients get pissed by that. And it's a very easy conversation. Mrs. Jones, I totally understand that you're upset, but we had an hour reserved for you last week where, we tried to confirm the appointment. You didn't call, you didn't show up. So in order to get back into the schedule, this is what we're going to do.
And then we call it a 24-hour rule for openings. So again, if you're going to block things in your first chair, like I'm only going to allow 2 restorative appointments or 2 crown appointments, whatever it is, for us, the day before, all bets are off. So if you still see openings the day before and you're trying to fill it, then we fill it with whatever. We'll fill it with emergencies. We'll fill it with restorative appointments. You do you. You come up with a protocol that is very black and white for the front desk on, is it 24 hours ahead? Is it 48 hours ahead? What's allowed to go in there? Just be black and white. Just be, very objective about it so your front desk knows exactly what you're trying to do. A couple more slides here. I have a man crush on Dave Ramsey. I'm comfortable enough in my sexuality to be able to admit it. One of the things that he says routinely is to be unclear is to be unkind. And I believe that to the nth degree. I think that sometimes we believe that just because we have an employee that's in the same building as us, then they can somehow through osmosis understand what's going on in our head. And, why don't you understand exactly what I want done? Well, the reason they don't understand is because we haven't clearly articulated what we want. So just over communicate, be extremely clear with what your expectations are. In our world, we have the doctor check the schedule at 1 week. It takes 2 minutes. So if it's a Tuesday, they have on their end of day checklist, check next Tuesday, right? So they're just quickly going over it. And if there's something that looks kind of funny, then they're sending a Slack message to the TC, right? We have the TC check it at 3 days, and then we have the assistant check it at 1 day, all right? And then meeting cadences. Minute meetings, you guys have heard me use the term minute meetings. If there's a situation that's not right, then you need to have a minute meeting right away. Okay. Typically, either if it happened in the morning, I want you to have a minute meeting before lunch. And if it happens in the afternoon, I want you to have a minute meeting before the end of the day. I think this is the final slide. It wouldn't be me if I didn't talk about leadership and accountability. So, you're going to put together a framework for your team based on this, or maybe you realize that you have a decent framework in place already, but it's not clear enough. The guidelines are not crystal clear. So first thing you need to do is make sure that the rules of the house are very, very clear. For me, the rules of the house are core values. Do you have core values and are they well defined? That's the first rule of the house. The second rule of the house is the roles and responsibilities of the particular seat we're talking about. So the tasks that they're responsible for, all of the stuff that they're responsible for, a TC, a greeter, an assistant, whatever it is. And then the final rule of the house is the overall vision of the practice, right? So I have absolute clarity on that. If things are lacking, if someone makes a mistake, you have to go into the storm right away. And I don't mean into the storm with like swords and just like ready to pound on somebody, but you have to be able to develop the character, to go to that TC, go to that greeting coordinator right away in the moment and have a conversation. Okay. Have a minute meeting. And when you do that, like Mark alluded to yesterday, you always do it from a position of curiosity and empathy. Okay. So an example would be there was a scheduling mistake made and I realized it in the morning. Before I go to lunch, I'm going to that treatment coordinator and I'm going to her from a position of empathy and curiosity. Help me understand why you made that scheduling mistake. I need to understand what's going on here. And I can assure you it's always going to be one of 3 things. I didn't know. Okay. I knew, but I didn't really understand. Or I didn't have enough time to do it right. Every single thing that goes wrong in your office, it's one of those 3 things. If it's, I didn't know, okay, wow, great. What an opportunity here. Now you know, right? Now I'm making you clearly aware that this is what we need to do. If they knew, but they weren't trained on the system, then it gives you a training opportunity. And if they knew they're trained and they didn't have enough time, then you have to go through we were talking about a hot seat, some time journaling, maybe making sure that everyone has tasks that are fair and responsible and it's divvied up the right way. Always communicate the why. So why are we scheduling like this? And everyone's going to have their own why, but more often than not, it's so we can see patients on time, we're not running behind, and we don't get stressed out, right? So in our world, these scheduling templates lead to that. So if someone needs to understand why, make sure you explain that to them. Make sure they understand the consequences of not doing what you've asked them to do. And I don't mean consequences like you're going to get fired or you're going to get suspended. I mean consequences like when you don't follow this protocol, this happens. So when someone doesn't respect the scheduling blocks that you've put in for direct resins, the result is I work my ass off all day long and I get really stressed out. Okay. I don't generate a ton of revenue. I get in my car pissed off. I go home and I kick my dog. I yell at my wife. I yell at my kids. So that's the consequence, right? They need to understand that consequence. I mean, it's serious. I mean, you guys are joking, but I know you've all been there, right? The consequence of not following the template is boom, boom, boom. So then once you've had those conversations, if they're continuing to repeat the issue, then you have to bring in the rest of the team, right? Then you have to say, look, hey, Sally at the front desk is really struggling to follow this scheduling protocol. I've worked with her a little bit. She's still not getting it. I'm bringing the rest of the front desk team in to help her coach her up in the moment. I can't constantly coach her up. So if you see a scheduling mistake, bring it to her attention, coach her through it, help her out with that. I want to just talk really quickly about this podcast project that I'm starting. It's called the Dental Lighthouse Podcast. It's, again, just copying everything that Dave Ramsey does. I'm not going to reinvent the wheel because he's done it much better than me. But for those of you guys that haven't listened to Dave Ramsey's Entre Leadership podcast, it's a phenomenal resource where small business owners call up and they ask Ramsey just really great questions. And he coaches them through how to get through some stuff. I had the idea of doing the same thing in dentistry. And we've already had our first set of recordings. We took 10 calls, and they were awesome. Some of you guys in the room called. We had a regional manager call. We had a hygienist call about ways to help her 18-year-old son get through, find a job. I mean, just some really, really good stuff. So my goal is to create an outlet where either you guys or your office managers or your people on your team can call up and just say, like, I'm struggling with this. What would you do here? And I really feel that once we get a regular cadence of people calling in and get it recorded and edited out, that it'll be a huge resource for other people to listen to. Because our problems are not unique to dentistry. Once you listen to Ramsey's podcast, you'll realize that HVAC guys, chiropractors, manufacturers, it's all the same stuff, right? We're all dealing with the same problems. It's just people and just trying to figure out how to grow people and raise people. So this is a QR code for our next scheduling link for calls. So if you have someone on your team that you think could benefit from a call with us, give them this the scheduling link. And then as soon as we have clarity on when the podcast is going to drop for the first episode and subsequent episodes, I'll make sure that you guys know. And I hope it's a resource for you guys. And I hope that you find value in some of the calls that we take. So that's it. Appreciate your time. Appreciate your attention. I don't know if we have time for questions. If any, Mark. See, so that's the difference between Mark. Mark's like, yes, we have time. You know, Mark's not like, I don't know, we have time for questions. So does anyone have any questions on the templates that we talked about or anything in particular about anything? Yeah. Dr. Keikos in the back.
Jason, could you spend some time talking about your evolution as a leader, where you started and how you've gotten to where you are now? Jason. Could you spend some time talking about your evolution as a leader, how you started, things that you've reflected on, things that you noticed in your past that you've been able to change, and how you've been able to achieve the level of leadership that you have now?
Yeah, I could try. That's a pretty deep question, Ben, but I would expect nothing less. So for me, like none of us do things that we think are wrong, right? Like anyone that goes through the day makes decisions that in their heart or in their gut or in their mind, they're like, I'm making this decision because I think it's the right way to do things. And for me, for the longest time, I would make decisions that I thought were right. And in reality, I realized after the fact, after I created a little bit more self-awareness, they were wrong. So for example, I would hire somebody and I would just expect, because they had experience as a dental assistant, that they would know exactly how I wanted them to act and behave as a dental assistant. And once they would be brought into the office and after 2 or 3 weeks, they were continually screwing up, I would yell, I would be passive aggressive with them. And then I would ultimately either let them go or they would quit. And I would always default to, they were not a good fit, or they screwed up, or good luck them being successful with anything down the road. And the reality is it was such a failure on my part because I wasn't crystal clear with what my expectations were for that particular person. So I've pivoted. I've realized that what I thought I was doing was incorrect. And now I've gotten to the point where really trying to be over the top clear with people. I'm a firm believer in servant leadership. I know sometimes servant leadership gets a bad rap, and sometimes people think servant leaders get walked over or doormats and stuff like that. But I truly believe that if we can show people tons of love, if we can pour into them, if we can be crystal clear with what we expect of them, be honest with them, from a position of love, from a position of we're trying to get them to grow, then we'll ultimately develop a team, or have people around us that, are happy and are successful. And it's not just a work-related thing. It's the same with like my kids, right? If I'm not showing my kids just constant love, and by love, I mean, yes, be patient with them, be kind with them, be humble with them, be selfless with them. That's like the hugging part of love, right? But also the spanking part of love, be unbelievably honest with them about what my expectations are, set up boundaries for them, and hold them accountable to those things. If you do both sides of that, then at least in my experience, things turn out okay. So that's been an evolution for me where instead of leading with power, instead of just telling people what to do, do this or else, do this because I said so, I've switched a little bit and tried to lead with love, both at work and at home. And it's helped me quite a bit. So hope that answers your question. What's up? I don't know. I'm getting old. Is that Matt? Yeah.
So can you comment on, back to scheduling? They got column 1 and column 2, and the doctors are saying, put this in column 2 for 60 minutes, put this in column 1 for an hour and a half or whatever. Do you have the block scheduling so locked down so that, for instance, I'm not starting a crown at 9 in column 1 and starting 3 fillings in column 2? How do you manage that? Or do you just build in long enough time and it's just an understanding that the patient waits a little bit and you do it in a way that the patient doesn't get frustrated? How do you do that?
Yeah, let's just go to an example here so we're on the same page. So again, great question. So this is column 1, this is column 2. And his question was, how do you, let's say it's 7 a.m., that's when we start. So you're about to walk into a root canal build-up crown here, and over here is a quadrant of fillings, right? How do you expect the doctor to manage starting root canal build-up crown here, and then also starting and performing a quadrant of fillings here? The answer is you don't. So again, with our templates, you would never put a quadrant of fillings in the second chair. That's why I don't like this whole rock, sand, water concept, right? And these consultants would say, if it's a dollar amount of like $500 or less, then it's sand. So you put it in the second chair. Well, I can tell you, and I'm fairly efficient clinically, if I have root canal buildup crown here because it's a rock, and then I have 2 fillings back to back here because it's quote unquote sand, there's nothing that's more stressful in my entire life. Like, I am not going down that road. It just doesn't make sense to me. So I will not put, and every doctor has the autonomy to have a template set up to put whatever they want in their second chair. But back to back interproximal fillings here, no effing way. Like it's just not happening, right? So what we do have some doctors that will put a non-interproximal two-surface filling here. So I don't have a problem putting 18 OB here, okay, or 3 OL here. And that's a really good way to add a little bit of hourly production without being stressed out. But it's just not possible, in my opinion, to deliver a high level of clinical care and a good customer experience when you're expected to start endo build-up crown here, and then you have 3 MO, 4 DO here. So to answer your question is we just don't do it. We wouldn't allow it. Sometimes. So if
Can you repeat the question?
Oh yeah. So the question is,
Jesus, this is loud. Sorry.
So the question is, do you change, units based on mandibular or maxillary teeth because you need more time for anesthetic? So sometimes. So if I'm, for example, when I was doing this a lot, if I'm diagnosing buildup and crown on 18, I might ask for 90 minutes in the first chair. Whereas if I was doing buildup and crown on 4, I might ask for 60 minutes in the first chair to allow for that different amount of time. But the real way that I would get around that is, again, if like I was kind of making that, creating that situation where I have the choice to walk into 3 rooms, right? And I know I need to be in all 3 rooms. Which room am I going to walk into first? I have to have the self-awareness of like, okay, I need to give a block here. I'm going to walk into here first. I'm going to give the block, and then I'm going to manage the patient's expectations, telling them that I am not going to be back in this room for 20 minutes. And it's not because I'm having coffee. It's not because I'm going to go check 6 other patients. I'm telling this patient that I'm not going to be back in 20 minutes because I'm insistent that they're going to be fully numb, and it takes 15 to 20 minutes for that to happen. Does it take 15 to 20 minutes for that to happen? No. Does Mrs. Jones know that? No. But she's appreciative of me not starting before the anesthetic takes place. Like, how many of you guys have said, I'm so afraid of the dentist because the doctor I went to last week gave me an injection, started working 10 seconds later. Like, that didn't happen, but like in the patient's mind that happened. So when you tell them, I'm really concerned about your well-being, I'm going to give you 15 minutes to get fully numb, you walk on water, right? And then that gives you the capacity to go check hygiene, to go take out a tooth. You know, we put single extractions in the second chair all the time. How long does it take you to go in and, especially a periodontally involved tooth, go in and take out a periodontally involved tooth? It takes you 5 minutes of that hour appointment, but 20 minutes for them to get numb, 10 minutes for the assistant to go with post-op notes, all of that other stuff. So hopefully that answered your question. Hey, Jason. So we don't have really any blocks in the second chair outside of we leave one spot for same day emergencies. But my staff knows that these are basically second chair appointments, right? So crown deliveries, ERs, new patients, consults. I put sand in here, but like I was saying before, we don't do sand based on like dollar value. It's just based on how intensive the doctor has to be. So all of these are typically second chair appointments. Single unit fillings that are not interproximal. Like I said, 18 OB, 3 OL, single extraction, depending on your skill level. It doesn't, you take Aaron's course, you're going to be taking out, upper molars in like 5 minutes. But you still need, in my opinion, an hour the patient needs to get numb. They need to kind of calm down. The assistant needs to get post-op notes and stuff like that. But that's how you get really productive, right? You end up doing $400 or $500, $600 out of your first chair with a couple fillings or a crown, and then you add a $300 extraction, or you add a $200 two-surface filling, or a triage or a limited exam, and all of a sudden you're doing like $700-800 an hour, and you're doing $1 million, $1.5 million a year just yourself. So that's how you end up getting to this point. Yeah, almost 99% of our second chair appointments are an hour. Yeah, we fooled around with trying to make them shorter, but when you start to make them shorter, the wheels start to come off, right? Because what if the patient was late? Or now all of a sudden that assistant doesn't have the time to go to sterilization and help keep up with instruments. So it's just been successful for us to have every second chair appointment be an hour. If I'm ahead of schedule in the first chair, I can hop into an emergency second chair appointment and actually perform something. I could do a quick crown. I could take out a tooth. I have a little bit of bandwidth or capacity to do that.
Oh, on the far left over here. Since you'd like to use me as an example, I'm going to do the same for you. I'm trying to plan out my year here. I'm just curious what the dates on that week-long leadership retreat was that you were doing.
What are you talking about?
Yeah, the week-long leadership retreat you're putting on.
No, I'm not quite putting on a week-long leadership retreat. So Max is in a unique position, right? He's got a huge heart, and sometimes it gets in the way of a lot of other things. But, he's got one of the most unique skill sets known to man, at least to clinical dentistry, yet he's doing Mrs. Jones's two-surface filling, where he should be giving this to his new doc. So in coaching calls with Max, I'm trying to bang into his head, stop doing this, right? The reason that you're stressed out at the end of the day from all of this restorative is because you won't say no, right? And then when he does say no, the TCs come to him and be like, but Mrs. Jones really loves you, Max. I mean, he is cute, but give me a break. The associate can do it, right? So you just learn to say no. And sometimes for me personally and this is going to sound weird, but sometimes this is how I justify things in my own mind is when I cave, I'm basically stealing from my kids, right? When I'm not nearly as productive as I could or should be, or when I'm getting stressed out because I'm doing back-to-back restorative appointments, it's ultimately stealing from them and from my wife and from the lifestyle that I'm able to provide for my family. And that's one of the ways that I can justify saying no at work. I love the phrase is every time you say yes to something, you're ultimately saying no to something else without even really realizing it. So when I say yes to Mrs. Jones, what I'm basically saying no to is peace of mind or, getting through the day on time at a level of production that I ultimately want and being able to get home and be present with my family. So that's just how I justify it in my own mind.
I know you touched on it, but could you expand on how to keep the new patient exams, the doctor time in there to a minimum while still keeping the patient experience up?
For sure. So you mean when they come through hygiene? Yeah. So again, it's training, right? So our hygienists know that for a new patient exam, the doctor is really not going to dedicate more than 10 minutes to the hygiene exam. So the first thing that has to be answered is, was the patient scheduled correctly? So if it's a train wreck, patient's missing multiple teeth, hasn't been to the dentist in a long time, broken teeth, a lot. If the front desk, or we call it the contact center, if they pick up that it's a train wreck type patient, they shouldn't be scheduled on hygiene. We schedule in the second chair on the doctor's side, where we have a lot more time to do things. But sometimes those types of patients get through. If they get through, then the hygienist will have to start the process of saying, Mrs. Jones, there's a lot going on here. Takes the x-rays, takes the iTero scan. And then, like I said, the verbiage that we typically use is, first developing some rapport in the first few minutes. And then in their defense, and what I think that they want, or what I know what they want, is if there's a lot going on, then just being honest and saying, Mrs. Jones, it's really not fair for me to try to figure out everything that's going on and develop a treatment plan, giving you choices and stuff within the limited amount of time that I have here. But I would love to collect all of these x-rays, your iTero scans. I mentioned this in the hot seat yesterday. This is the language that I use. I say, I'm going to come in this weekend. I'm going to learn your case inside and out. And I want you to come back next week where I'll be able to go over all of your options, what it's going to cost, how we can phase it out. I would love for you to bring an advocate, a second set of eyes and ears, so they can hear exactly what we're talking about. And then we'll come up with a definitive plan for you. 99% of the time, that patient is going to be appreciative of that. 1% of the time, you're going to get a situation like, just tell me what I need, just tell me what I need. And early in my career, I would cave and just throw something out there. Now I'm just like, it's not fair. It's just not fair to you to be able to collect all of this information and know within minutes what you're going to need to get healthy long term. So I hope that answers your question. Oh, I got room for one more question. We can talk at the break too. Go ahead, Jason.
Do you set pre-block like a in your first column, how do you pre-block the times? Do you set, like, we do major and minor blocks, like hour and a half hour, but how do you do that based on,
so it depends. If it's a new doc and they're just hungry and they're just trying to stay busy, then we won't put any blocks in, right? If it's someone that's a little bit more established and they're still doing basic restorative, then we'll in open dental, we'll put 2 blocks, like morning restorative, afternoon restorative. And by restorative, I mean direct resin. So morning direct resin, afternoon direct resin. And they have the autonomy, the TCs have the autonomy to slide that block up and down. And once it gets filled, it's filled. We move on to the next day and to the next day and to the next day. So, there was some buzzwords yesterday, block scheduling. Like, I don't really believe in block scheduling. In hygiene, I believe it to a certain extent, but I think it's too rigid, especially if you're trying to teach a 20-year-old. But again, maybe I'm just a poor leader and teacher when it comes to that. But I find that this type of block scheduling is just much more predictable.
And how would you avoid, like, if they want a 40-minute appointment, then it's hard to fill like a 20-minute.
You don't get a 40-minute appointment.
It's either like an hour.
You get an hour. You get an hour minimum, and then we can go in half-hour increments. I mean, that's a great question, right? That's in hygiene too. The hygienists are like, well, I only need 50 minutes for this hygiene appointment. I don't need an hour. Or I need 40 minutes. I don't need an hour. And, I've made every mistake in the world. And so I caved to that. Okay, I can give you 50 minutes or I can give you 40 minutes. Well, what happens when that 50-minute appointment cancels and now you need to put a 60-minute appointment in there, right? So the hygienist then gets pissed at you, be like, I told you in the notes that I needed 60 minutes for this appointment and you only gave me 50 minutes. Well, there was a 50-minute opening. What was I supposed to do? So it's not predictable. And I hate things that are not predictable. So every hygiene appointment is either 30 minutes or an hour. Every doctor appointment is a 60-minute minimum, and we can increase in half-hour increments. So, all right. I'd be more than happy to hang out. I'll be around and answer more questions. Thank you so much for your time and attention. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. That wraps up another episode of the Dental Lighthouse podcast. You have a choice today. Choose to be a lighthouse. Lighthouses are powerful and steadfast. They are beacons of light for others to reference when life gets turbulent. Go out into the world today and become a lighthouse for someone. Give more than you get. True joy comes from serving others. Start today. I'm Jason Tenori, your host. Thank you for listening to the Dental Lighthouse podcast. For more information, podcast show notes, or links to anything that we have discussed today, please check out our website, thedentallighthouse.com. We would love to hear from you. If you would like to get on the show, please email us at podcast@thedentallighthouse.com.